Welcome to RCSP Florida. Today I want to talk with you about whether to buy a mirrorless or DSLR full-frame camera. A lot of what I'm going to tell you will still be valid over the next few years as new photographers struggle with what to buy or seasoned photographers struggle with upgrading their existing camera gear. The seasoned photographers will have a tougher time deciding, and you'll find out why in a moment. First off, let me talk a bit about what is available today, fall of 2018. With the recent announcements by Nikon, Canon, and Panasonic about full-frame mirrorless cameras, there will be lots of choices in the coming years besides Sony. Sony is the obvious leader of the group at this time since it's had mirrorless full-frame cameras on the market for several years and is on its third generation of the A7 line of cameras with the introduction of the A7R III and A7 III earlier this year and the rumored release of the A7S III. Nikon just came out with the Z6 and Z7 full-frame mirrorless as their entry into the market. Canon just introduced the EOS R system. At Photokina 2018, Panasonic announced the release of two full-frame mirrorless cameras, the S1 and S1R. Fuji just released the X-T3, which is not a full-frame camera, but an APS-C camera, but it still has to be considered as one of the top-of-the-line mirrorless cameras available today. I won't go over all the specs for these cameras because it has been beaten to death on YouTube for the last several weeks, so I won't bother you with that. I want to talk with you more about the differences and why you might want to choose one system over the other. In my mind, DSLR cameras will be here for years to come, but eventually the mirrorless cameras will win out, but not anytime soon. So DSLR cameras are still a viable camera choice and may be right for you. So let's look at why you might want to choose a DSLR camera over a mirrorless camera. First and foremost could be the price. As mirrorless cameras become more and more popular, the price of DSLR cameras will come down, so there could be some very good deals on used or even on new ones. A DSLR camera can give you excellent picture quality, high frame rate, and just about anything a mirrorless camera can give you, and in a lot of cases, even more. I bought the first Canon 6-megapixel Rebel DSLR when it came out many years ago, and I have been shooting Canon ever since. I currently own three Canon camera bodies, a 5D Mark III, a 7D Mark II, and a 6D. I'm a nature and landscape photographer and videographer that specializes in bird photography, so my main camera is the 7D Mark II with a Canon 100-400mm version 2 lens. I also own the 16-35mm f4 and the 24-105mm f4 lenses and a few others with Canon EF mounts. This will become important later. If I were only a stills photographer, I wouldn't even think about changing to mirrorless. So if you are only going to shoot stills, there is really no reason to go mirrorless unless you just want to keep up with the trend. The price of mirrorless cameras is about in line with the equivalent DSLR or maybe a little higher. The lenses for these new full-frame mirrorless cameras are generally higher in price than their equivalent DSLR brethren, and there are currently very few used ones on the market. Everyone talks about the size and weight being so much less with mirrorless cameras and lenses than the DSLR equivalent, but look at the specs. Some of the lenses for these new full-frame mirrorless cameras are even larger than their DSLR cousins. Yes, the camera body may be smaller and lighter, but some of these cameras are hard to hold on to because their grips are so small. You sometimes need to add the battery grip to feel comfortable holding on to it. When you do, the size and weight difference goes away in most cases. Now, remember, we are talking full-frame cameras here and not APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. There is an advantage to those cameras because the lenses can be much smaller and lighter because of the sensor size. When it comes to full-frame cameras, size and weight are not really what you should be worrying about. For this reason, DSLR cameras are still a very viable camera for a stills photographer and should definitely be considered, especially if you're on a budget. I mentioned earlier that I was a Canon shooter, but let me assure you that I am not a fanboy as some people call photographers that shoot only one brand of camera and think it is the only brand that is any good. That is way far from the truth. A camera is a tool to me, and I will shoot whatever gives me the best results and I can afford. I am obviously a YouTuber, but I rarely shoot any video on any of my Canon cameras. For video, I shoot 4K using the Panasonic Lumix GH5. I also own a GH4 and LX10 for doing video. I will tell you right now that the DSLR camera that I would want if I stayed with a DSLR and could afford to switch would be the Nikon D850. I think as of today, it is the best DSLR camera on the market for what I do. The last statement is very important because the camera you choose should fit your subject matter and your style of shooting. So why should you go mirrorless? Here are some of the reasons that I plan on going mirrorless as soon as I can. I need to shoot not only great stills, but I also need to shoot 4K video. Right now, I sometimes walk around with 3 cameras and a heavy-duty tripod and head just to be able to get the shots and video I need. That much gear is bulky and heavy, and I'm not getting any younger. I need a great stills camera with 30 to 50 megapixels that also shoots excellent 4K video up to 4K 60 and HD up to 120 frames per second, and preferably no crop on the 4K. Right now, the Sony a7R III and A9 and the Nikon Z6 and Z7 are the only cameras that meet those specifications. The A9 is a little out of my price range, like the Canon 1DX Mark II and the Nikon D5. So why don't I buy a Sony a7R III or Z7? I like Sony and Nikon, but here comes the part about not brand loyalty as much as it is it's too expensive for me to change. If money was no object, I would have probably done so already. However, I have what is to me a small fortune invested in Canon glass that I would really take a hit on if I had to sell them. Same for the 3 bodies I own. On top of that, the equivalent Sony and Nikon lenses are even more expensive than what I paid for my Canon L-series lenses. The Nikon selection for the Z6 and Z7 is also very limited today. It all comes down to economics. I either wait for Canon to come out with what I need or take a serious hit monetarily that I can't afford to do. This is why seasoned photographers have a tougher decision to make. They have too much invested in their current bodies and lenses. The other option is to have the camera manufacturers come out with adapters that make your current lenses really work like native glass. Canon and Nikon have already done this for the EOS R and the Z6 and Z7. However, all of these cameras only have 1 card slot. I can't afford to pay for a trip and come home empty-handed, so a 1 card slot camera is a spoiler for me. Before you ask, yes, I have had 2 cards fail over the years. It is rare, but I feel much better if I have 2 cards being mirrored. If I was being paid for my video and photos, I would certainly want 2 card slots. The EOS R crops to 1.7 when shooting 4K video and doesn't shoot 4K full frame. This is not a bad thing for me since my 100 to 400mm lens would now be equal to 680mm instead of the normal 640mm using the 7D Mark II. So this is not necessarily a deal breaker for me, at least for what I do. In fact, I hope the next Canon EOS R version comes out with a choice of full frame or APS-C similar to the 5DSR and Sony a7s. Full frame 4K may be more important for what you do. That's why if someone asks me what camera to buy, it is not a simple question. It depends on what you shoot. The frame rate on the EOS R is also not as good as my 7D Mark II. I have had my hands on the EOS R and I really like the camera. It feels good in my hands and it seems to focus quickly. The main thing for me is it has adapters that will work with my Canon EF lenses and perform as well on the EOS R as they do on my 3 DSLR Canon bodies, so I don't have to buy new lenses. Their selection of adapters is also excellent, especially the one with the polarizer or variable ND filter holder. I hope to get a loaner from Canon through my CPS membership, but so far it is not offered as a loaner for some reason. If I can get my hands on one, I will make a video about using it for bird photography using the 100 to 400mm version 2 lens I use on my 7D Mark II. I do not have access to any of the other cameras like some of the other YouTubers with way more subscribers than I have, so I can't tell you any more than what you have already seen on YouTube about the Nikon Z6 and Z7. The Panasonic S1 and S1R will not be released until early 2019, probably March or April, or maybe not until Photokina 2019, which is now in May. The Nikon Z6 and Z7 have some great features as well, but again suffer from some of the same issues Canon has. I would also have to sell all of my cameras and lenses to go with Nikon. The Nikon shooters with a lot of money invested in bodies and lenses are in the same boat I am. I think we are both going to have to wait until the next version comes out. I'm sure it will, but who knows how long that will take. I hope by Photokina in May of 2019, Canon will announce the next version in the EOS R series. They say 2 more versions are coming, and I predict it will be a mirrorless version of the 5DS or 5DSR or the 5D Mark IV, and also the 1DX Mark II. I have heard rumors there will be one above the EOS R and one below. I hope that's not true. We'll have to wait and see. The EOS R, in my opinion, is a 6D Mark II equivalent with a better sensor. The other reason I want to switch to a mirrorless is the EVF. Until I started shooting with the GH4 and 5, I was okay with shooting my DSLR. Now I really like the fact that I don't have to chimp every time I take a picture to see if it came out okay. I shoot manual for video and stills, and I can see exactly what I am going to get before I ever push the record button or click the shutter. What you see is what you get. I can also use the EVF in bright sunlight to be able to compose the shot and see what I really got after I take the picture or record the video. Once I used an EVF, it was hard to go back to my DSLR, although I do for shooting stills. What I am looking for is a full-frame GH5 that has great focus, made by Canon. I hope they don't let me down, but I'm afraid they will, just to try and protect their cinema line of cameras, selling for thousands more than their DSLR or mirrorless cameras. If they do, I may have no choice but to bite the bullet eventually and move to Sony or Panasonic. I heard a rumor that Panasonic was going to have an EF lens adapter for their full-frame mirrorless, but that was not in the announcement, so it just could be a wishful rumor. Again, we'll have to wait and see. There are some things I don't like about Sony, like their color science, for example, so I hope Panasonic gives us another choice. I'm really happy with the GH5, but it is not as good as my Canon when it comes to color science or autofocus by any means. Autofocus where the S1 and S1R will need a lot of work and improvement over the GH5 to match the Sony, Nikon, and Canon. The latest 2.4 version of firmware for the GH5 has helped, but not completely solved the poor focus and autofocus performance this camera has suffered from the very beginning. In summary, whatever you do, don't just blow off a DSLR as a viable choice. They are still fabulous cameras if you mainly shoot stills, and you won't be disappointed if you buy one. Even if you shoot an occasional video, they are still great cameras. If you're like me and shoot about 50-50 stills and video, then you may want to look at a mirrorless. Shooting video with a mirrorless for me is far easier with an EVF. You can use your rear screen to shoot live video on a DSLR, but it is hard or impossible to see the screen in bright sunlight. I also can't hold the camera out in front of me and shoot video using the rear screen. I have trouble tracking moving subjects at arm's length. I need to have the camera on a tripod with an external monitor with a sunshade to be able to do that. The EVF solves that problem. You just keep the viewfinder up to your eye and off you go. A lot of what I shoot in video is handheld, and being able to track moving subjects is a must as a wildlife videographer. What I shoot tends to move a lot. If you shoot stills with occasional videos, then the DSLR is still a good and most likely the less expensive way to go. There's also a lot of used equipment on the market if you want to save money and buy used gear. If you shoot a lot of video and very few stills, then I recommend the mirrorless for the reasons stated above. Out of all the mirrorless full-frame cameras on the market today, Sony is leading the pack with the A7R III and A7 III. I did not mention the Sony A9 because it is their top-of-the-line camera and more expensive than all the rest we have talked about. It is an impressive camera if you have the money and need the added features it offers. Same goes for the Canon 1DX Mark II and Nikon D5. It's too early to say how the Canon and Nikon mirrorless will perform in all situations. I personally am going to wait until the next version of the EOS R system comes out and hope Canon doesn't shoot themselves in the foot again by holding back features to protect their other camera lines. If I was a Nikon shooter, I would be in the same boat and I would do the same thing. I hope both these iconic camera manufacturers start listening to what customers need and want instead of just giving us what they want to. Many long-term Canon and Nikon shooters have jumped ship to go to Sony because they seem to be listening to their customers and giving them what they want. Canon and Nikon both need to wake up and smell the roses before it is too late. I hope Panasonic comes through with a great camera, but I still doubt the focusing will be as good as the other three, unless they have made a breakthrough with contrast AF and DFD we don't know about yet. I don't think they will, but we can always hope. Once again, we'll have to wait and see. That's my opinion, and if you have a different one, please tell me in the comments, but please be nice about it. If I'm not being paid by anyone, and I bought all of my camera gear with my own money. If you make a nasty comment, it will just be deleted. I hope this helps you make a decision on what to buy. If you have any questions, please leave me a note in the comments. My website is www.rcspfl.com. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. I would appreciate that. Have a great day.